The metallic glint of a damaged P-51 Mustang descended through broken cloud cover over the French countryside on June 6, 1944. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser of the 334th Fighter Squadron had lost his bearings during the chaos above the Normandy beaches, his Packard Merlin engine trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. The fighter, bearing the squadron code QPG and nicknamed Jerry, struck the ground hard somewhere near Rouen. Fraser survived the crash landing, but his war as a fighter pilot was over. He would spend the remainder of the conflict as a prisoner of war. His aircraft, however, serial number 43 to 24825, a P-51B-15 model, was about to embark on a journey that would profoundly shake the assumptions held by some of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots. The Mustang lay relatively intact in that French field, and German salvage teams had perfected the systematic art of retrieving crashed Allied aircraft across occupied Europe. Within weeks, this particular machine would be transporting to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary testing facility located approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin. There it would undergo meticulous repairs using components cannibalized from other wrecks scattered across German-controlled territory. The aircraft would emerge wearing German markings, its fuselage bearing the Luftwaffe code T9+HK, its tail and undersides painted in bright RLM4 yellow for easy identification. A red band adorned the nose of the engine cowling. This Mustang was destined for service with one of the Luftwaffe's most unusual units, where it would force German fighter pilots to confront an uncomfortable reality about American engineering prowess and their own increasingly untenable tactical situation in the deteriorating air war over Europe. What happens when your enemy builds something so good that even flying it against your own pilots becomes a lesson in humility? Oberst Theodor Recerius understood that German fighter units needed more than scattered combat reports to counter the Allied threat effectively. They required hands-on experience with captured enemy aircraft, structured opportunities to fly these machines under controlled conditions, and systematic evaluation through direct observation. In 1943, following orders from General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, Recerius formed what would become known as the Wanderzirkus Recerius, officially designated as the second Staffel of Versuchsverband Oberkommando der Luftwaffe. This specialized unit received all repairable captured Allied aircraft that German salvage teams recovered from crash sites across occupied Europe. But Recerius didn't just want static testing at secure facilities behind the lines. He organized traveling demonstrations where captured aircraft would visit operational Luftwaffe fighter bases across Germany and occupied territories, allowing frontline pilots to examine these machines up close, observe them perform aerial demonstrations, and in carefully selected cases, fly mock combat missions against them. The program addressed a fundamental problem that had become increasingly critical as the war progressed. German fighter pilots trained primarily against their own aircraft, learning tactics optimized for fighting opponents who flew and fought like Germans. This created a dangerous blind spot when engaging Allied pilots whose aircraft possessed markedly different performance characteristics and whose training emphasized different tactical approaches. By late 1944, the Wanderzirkus Recerius took the captured and repaired Mustang-coded T9+HK on an extensive tour to operational Luftwaffe fighter bases across Germany, creating surreal scenes as enemy aircraft bearing German markings moved among German fighters, making the enemy tangible and real rather than abstract. The moment German test pilots climbed into the Mustang's cockpit, comfortable assumptions about American engineering began dissolving like morning fog. Official propaganda had consistently portrayed American aircraft as crude, mass-produced machines that prioritized quantity over quality, emphasizing manufacturing ease and simplicity rather than sophisticated engineering. The prevailing view among many German pilots held that American engineering focused on producing adequate numbers of acceptable aircraft rather than pursuing the engineering excellence that characterized the best German designs. But the cockpit layout of the P-51B immediately impressed German pilots familiar with the cramped confines of Messerschmitt Bf 109 cockpits. The Mustang cockpit demonstrated thoughtful ergonomic design with controls logically arranged and positioned within easy reach, reducing pilot workload and allowing concentration on tactical situations rather than struggling with aircraft systems. Instruments were clearly marked with easily readable gauges and sensibly grouped by function, following human factors principles that prioritized pilot effectiveness. The seat provided noticeably better comfort than German fighters, an important consideration during multi-hour missions where pilot fatigue could significantly impact performance. Visibility, even in the earlier Razorback configuration with its framed canopy, exceeded what Bf 109 pilots experienced with their heavily framed canopies and particularly poor rearward visibility. But sitting in the cockpit was one thing. The true revelation came when German test pilots advanced the throttle and felt the Packard V1650-3 Merlin engine respond with smooth, progressive power delivery. The power built steadily and predictably as the Mustang accelerated down Rechlin's runway, the four-bladed Hamilton standard propeller biting efficiently into the air. Once airborne, the Mustang demonstrated handling characteristics that fundamentally challenged everything German pilots thought they understood about American aircraft design philosophy. The flight controls were beautifully harmonized, with aileron, elevator, and rudder forces perfectly balanced across the entire speed range. The Mustang responded crisply and predictably to control inputs without displaying oversensitivity or nervous handling. Roll rate exceeded that of the Bf 109 significantly, allowing rapid changes in flight direction that were critical for both offensive and defensive maneuvering. German test pilots who flew captured Mustangs consistently reported being profoundly impressed by the aircraft's harmonized handling characteristics and overall ease of operation, striking an ideal balance that allowed pilots to fly aggressively and precisely without fear of overcontrolling or inadvertently losing control. At 30,000 feet, where the air grows thin and cold, the Mustang revealed a capability that sent chills down the spines of German tactical planners. German test pilots systematically evaluated the Mustang's performance envelope through carefully planned test flights, and climb performance impressed them considerably while generating significant concern about tactical implications. The P-51B could maintain excellent climb rates to altitudes well exceeding 30,000 feet, where the two-stage supercharged Merlin engine continued producing substantial power even as the progressively thinner air severely degraded performance in German fighters equipped with single-stage superchargers. This high-altitude performance particularly concerned German pilots because American bomber formations typically operated between 25,000 and 30,000 feet, where defensive fire from bombers remained effective against fighters. German fighters equipped with single-stage superchargers struggled increasingly to intercept effectively at these altitudes, their engines gasping for sufficient air, while the Mustang's sophisticated two-stage Merlin with intercooler continued delivering robust, reliable power. The revelation proved sobering to pilots and commanders who understood the implications. The Mustang could not only escort bombers to these altitudes, but could fight there effectively, maintaining speed advantage and maneuverability, while German interceptors labored with reduced power, slower speeds, and degraded handling as their engines fought against the thin atmosphere. The sophisticated two-stage supercharger system represented a significant technological achievement, delivering substantially more power at altitude than single-stage supercharged engines. At optimal altitude, with the engine running at military power settings, the P-51B could achieve approximately 440 miles per hour, significantly faster than the Messerschmitt Bf 109Gs, approximately 386 miles per hour, and the Focke-Wulf FW 190 As approximately 408 miles per hour when measured under comparable conditions. This wasn't just a numbers game on paper. This substantial speed advantage proved tactically decisive in combat because it fundamentally allowed Mustang pilots to dictate engagement terms according to their advantage. American pilots could choose when to engage, pursuing fleeing German fighters when the tactical situation favored attack. Equally important, they could choose to disengage from unfavorable encounters, accelerating away from German fighters that lacked sufficient speed to pursue or force continued combat. German pilots discovered they could not force combat on a Mustang whose pilot recognized an unfavorable situation and chose to avoid engagement. German fighter pilots had grown accustomed to a certain rhythm in the air war over Europe, a predictable pattern that offered at least some tactical advantage even as the strategic situation deteriorated. Early in the war, German fighters could simply wait until shorter-range Allied escorts reached their fuel limits and turned back toward their bases, then attack unprotected bombers during the most dangerous portions of their missions deep in German territory. It was a waiting game, and German pilots knew how to play it. But when German engineers at Rechlin carefully inspected the Mustang's fuel system and began conducting range trials, the numbers they recorded seemed almost impossible. The P-51B carried substantially more internal fuel than the Bf 109 or FW 190, and the aerodynamically efficient wing design based on NACA laminar flow airfoil sections translated this fuel capacity into truly extraordinary range. With external drop tanks attached under the wings, the Mustang could fly missions exceeding 8 hours duration, covering operational distances that seemed nearly impossible to German pilots, whose combat radius barely exceeded 200 miles under optimal conditions. This massive range advantage fundamentally transformed bomber escort operations in ways that proved strategically decisive. The Mustang completely eliminated the tactical window German pilots had relied upon. American escorts could now accompany bombers throughout entire missions deep into Germany and back to England, preventing German fighters from ever finding truly vulnerable targets. The strategic implications were profound and deeply troubling to Luftwaffe commanders. German fighters now had to fight their way through escorts to reach bombers, dramatically increasing the risk on every interception sortie. The wing design itself fascinated German engineers who examined it in meticulous detail, though achieving true laminar flow in operational conditions remained elusive due to manufacturing tolerances, surface imperfections, rivets, and operational wear. The P-51's wing generated substantial lift with minimal drag compared to conventional airfoils. This efficiency contributed significantly to the aircraft's remarkable range and fuel economy. American designers had created something that seemed to defy the normal compromises of aircraft design, an aircraft that could fight at the end of an impossibly long leash, and German pilots understood with uncomfortable clarity what this meant for their survival. The demonstrations orchestrated by the Wanda Circus Researius created scenes that bordered on surreal, moments when the absolute clarity of disadvantage became impossible to ignore. At one airfield hosting Jagdgeschwader 1 during late 1944, the base commander arranged for several of his most experienced pilots to fly mock engagements against the captured Mustang. These weren't novices or propaganda officers looking for good news to report up the chain of command. These were combat veterans, men who had survived months or years of brutal aerial combat over Europe, men who knew their aircraft intimately and understood how to extract every last advantage from a Bf 109 or FW 190. The German test pilot flying the P-51 demonstrated tactics that American pilots typically employed in actual combat, using the Mustang's clear advantages in speed and climb performance to maintain energy throughout the engagement while avoiding situations where the Mustang's lesser turn performance became a disadvantage. German pilots flying Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs and Focke-Wulf FW-190 as attempted to engage using standard Luftwaffe tactics that had proven effective against earlier Allied fighters. They quickly discovered the extreme difficulty of successfully engaging a Mustang whose pilot understood and properly utilized energy management techniques. When German pilots pursued aggressively, the Mustang simply accelerated away, opening distance faster than the pursuing German fighters could close it. When German pilots attempted to climb to gain an advantageous position above the Mustang for a diving attack, the P-51 outclimbed them, reaching superior altitude first and reversing the tactical situation. When German pilots tried to force a sustained turning fight, where the Bf-109's superior turn performance should have provided advantage, the Mustang pilot refused the engagement by extending away using superior speed, then reversed back into the engagement with renewed energy advantage when conditions favored attack. The mock combat sessions proved sobering for German pilots who had believed or hoped that their aircraft and established tactics remained reasonably competitive. After landing, after climbing down from their cockpits with that particular exhaustion that comes not from physical exertion, but from confronting uncomfortable truths, these experienced combat pilots had to file reports. They had to tell their squadron mates what they had learned. And what they had learned was that American pilots flying P-51s possessed significant and fundamental tactical advantages, particularly at the high altitudes where bomber escort combat typically occurred. The technical intelligence that German engineers extracted from captured Mustangs went far beyond simple flight testing and combat evaluation, revealing layers of sophistication that contradicted years of carefully constructed assumptions about American industrial capabilities. At both Rechlin and Göttingen, German engineers systematically disassembled P-51 components with the meticulousness of surgeons, attempting to understand not just what American designers had built, but how they had built it and why their approaches worked so effectively. They examined the wing structure and airfoil sections in obsessive detail, studying construction methods and attempting to decode precisely how American designers had achieved such aerodynamically efficient performance. They analyzed the Packard V1650-3 Merlin engine with intense interest, noting its sophisticated two-stage supercharger system with intercooler that enabled such impressive high-altitude performance. The fuel system received careful attention as engineers tried to understand how American designers had achieved such remarkable range. Throughout their investigation, German engineers noted repeatedly the consistently high quality of materials used throughout the aircraft. American access to strategic materials like high-grade aluminum alloys, specialized steels, and reliable rubber compounds allowed designers to create structures that effectively combined strength with acceptable weight while maintaining production efficiency. Germany faced increasingly severe material shortages by 1944, forcing the use of substitute materials that often proved inferior in strength, durability, or manufacturing characteristics. But perhaps most troubling was the revelation of sophisticated manufacturing techniques that enabled true mass production without significantly compromising quality standards. American factories produced P-51s using highly developed assembly line methods that maintained remarkably tight tolerances and consistent quality across thousands of individual aircraft. By late 1944, American factories were producing approximately 500 P-51s monthly, a figure that would climb to 881 aircraft per month by January 1945 at peak production. This output exceeded more than double the combined production rate of all German single-engine fighter types. These weren't just numbers in a report. Each one of those Mustangs represented an aircraft equipped with reliable engines built to consistent quality standards, sophisticated and accurate instruments, and radio equipment that actually worked consistently, unlike the often unreliable and poorly manufactured equipment in late-war German fighters. The Mustang represented tangible, undeniable evidence that American industrial and engineering capabilities equaled or exceeded German achievements in critical areas, contradicting years of propaganda about American industrial and technical inferiority. By late 1944, the psychological weight pressing down on German fighter pilots had become almost unbearable, and programs like the Wanderzirkus Reservius, intended to provide tactical advantages, often served primarily to illuminate just how desperate their situation had truly become. German pilots who thoroughly understood through direct experience the performance gap they faced carried knowledge that felt more like a burden than an advantage. These men had entered the war confident in their superior training, the capabilities of their aircraft, and the effectiveness of their tactical doctrines. Years of Luftwaffe propaganda had reinforced these beliefs, creating a framework of assumptions that shaped how they understood themselves and their enemy. But by late 1944, extensive combat experience and direct exposure to captured Allied aircraft had systematically eroded that confidence like waves wearing away a cliff face. They recognized with painful clarity that they fought opponents who possessed decisive advantages in aircraft performance, overwhelming numerical superiority, better logistics support, more thorough training, and superior intelligence. Former Luftwaffe pilot accounts from this period frequently describe the hopeless feeling of watching American fighter formations appear on the horizon and knowing intellectually that those escorts could not be avoided through any tactical maneuver and could not be outrun by any German fighter in operational service. German pilots understood that engaging Mustangs at high altitude meant fighting at severe disadvantage in every performance category that mattered. Declining to engage meant allowing American bombers to strike targets unopposed, accelerating Germany's military and industrial collapse. Neither option offered acceptable outcomes from a professional military perspective. The Wanderzirkus Reservius demonstrations revealed these harsh realities directly before pilots encountered them in actual combat, where the stakes were life and death. While this advanced preparation theoretically improved their chances of survival by providing realistic understanding of what they would face, it simultaneously made painfully clear the deteriorating situation German forces faced across all dimensions of the air war. Some German test pilots, who extensively flew captured P-51s, developed grudging professional respect for American engineering prowess despite their position as enemies. They recognized through direct experience that the Mustang represented a coherent, well-integrated design that intelligently prioritized the characteristics most valuable for its intended strategic mission. This wasn't crude mass production. This was sophisticated engineering that had deliberately selected appropriate design compromises to achieve clearly defined mission objectives. The captured Mustang designated T9 plus HK served with the Wanderzirkus Reservius until December 10, 1944, when the aircraft and its pilot, Oberleutnant Lepchens, were lost. Historical records do not definitively specify whether the aircraft crashed during a demonstration flight, was destroyed on the ground during an Allied air raid, or fell victim to other wartime circumstances. By that point in its second operational life, the aircraft had traveled extensively across Germany, visiting numerous Luftwaffe bases and providing direct hands-on education to hundreds of German pilots who gained invaluable first-hand knowledge of American aircraft capabilities. But the loss of one aircraft didn't end the program. Other captured Mustangs served similar evaluation and demonstration roles, bearing Luftwaffe codes and continuing the systematic work of revelation and tactical education. The Wanderzirkus Reservius continued operating into early 1945, conducting demonstrations with various captured aircraft as long as aviation fuel remained available in sufficient quantities and operational airfields could be maintained against Allied ground advances from both east and west. Yet as Allied forces advanced progressively deeper into Germany from multiple directions, the unit's ability to travel safely to operational bases diminished steadily. Eventually, the program necessarily ceased operations as the general collapse of German military organization overtook even specialized units that had previously received priority for scarce resources. The ultimate fate of various captured P-51s operated by German forces remains unclear in several cases due to incomplete records and the chaos of Germany's final collapse. Some were certainly destroyed on the ground during intensifying Allied air raids. Others may have been deliberately destroyed by retreating German forces to prevent recapture. The knowledge gained from systematically testing captured Mustangs provided German pilots with valuable tactical intelligence about aircraft capabilities, optimal engagement parameters, and exploitable weaknesses. But this knowledge ultimately could not overcome the fundamental and overwhelming disadvantages the Luftwaffe faced. Understanding intellectually that the Mustang could outrun, outclimb, and dramatically outrange German fighters offered limited practical benefit when German pilots still had to engage these superior aircraft under direct orders. The testing program represented a sophisticated attempt to counter Allied advantages through tactical innovation and improved pilot knowledge. But tactics and knowledge alone could not compensate for inferior aircraft performance, severe numerical disadvantage, inadequate training due to fuel shortages, and chronic shortages of experienced personnel. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser's P-51 B-15 serial number 43 to 24825, had an extraordinary afterlife that neither he nor the American military could have anticipated when it descended through broken clouds over France on D-Day. From a crashed fighter lying in a French field, it became an instrument of revelation for German pilots, concretely demonstrating American engineering capabilities and forcing acknowledgement of Allied air superiority that no amount of propaganda could overcome. The aircraft served this important educational role until its loss in December 1944, having traveled extensively across Germany and provided hands-on experience and sobering realistic assessment to hundreds of Luftwaffe personnel. The story of captured Mustangs in German service illustrates the sophisticated and professional approach the Luftwaffe took toward understanding enemy capabilities despite Germany's deteriorating strategic position. Rather than relying solely on fragmentary combat reports and intelligence assessments of uncertain reliability, German forces invested significant and scarce resources in recovering, repairing, and systematically flying captured Allied aircraft under controlled conditions. This represented best practices for military organizations seeking accurate intelligence, and it continued even as Germany's strategic situation became increasingly hopeless. Yet the Wanda Zirkus Resarius program ultimately demonstrated that even sophisticated intelligence gathering, professional competence, and systematic analysis could not overcome fundamental material and strategic disadvantages of the magnitude Germany faced. German pilots who flew captured Mustangs gained valuable knowledge about aircraft characteristics and optimal tactics, but that hard-won knowledge primarily confirmed what many already suspected. Allied aircraft possessed significant and decisive performance advantages that German industry and engineering could not match given resource constraints and strategic circumstances. The experience of German test pilots confronting the Mustang's capabilities parallels the broader German military experience during World War II's latter stages. Initial confidence in German technological superiority gradually gave way to recognition that Allied forces possessed decisive advantages in vast industrial capacity, access to strategic resources, enormous manpower reserves, and increasingly sophisticated technological capabilities. The Mustang represented one particularly visible manifestation of these Allied advantages, and German pilots' admission that they had never encountered handling characteristics like those demonstrated by the P-51 represented professional acknowledgement of American engineering achievement and realistic recognition of the significant performance gaps they faced in combat operations, forced by direct experience rather than propaganda or ideology.